coffee had gone cold in Colton Maddox's hands, but he hadn't moved from the kitchen window. He stood there, boots planted like fence posts, staring out across the wide Wyoming pasture where 70 head of cattle stood stock still in the morning sun. They weren't grazing. They weren't lying down. They weren't even flicking their tails. Just standing. Every single one of them. All facing east, like they were waiting for something. He rubbed the back of his neck and muttered, "The hell's gotten into y'all?" Colton had been ranching this land since his father passed nearly 3 decades ago. He'd seen cows spooked by coyotes, dazed from storms and spooked by prairie winds. But this was something different. The symmetry of it was unnatural. It was like some invisible conductor had raised a baton and every bovine had fallen in line. Ray Delgado, his ranch hand, came up the porch steps with a shovel slung over one shoulder and a red man cap low over his brow. "You seein' what I'm seein'?" he asked, leaning against the railing. "They've been like that for an hour," Colton said. "Third morning in a row." Ray chuckled, though it sounded thin. "Maybe there's a good-looking bull out that way." Colton didn't smile. The air felt heavier than it ought to. The wind didn't stir the grass. The silence wasn't just silence. It was absence. No bird song, no distant lowing, no creek babble from the draw. Just the static hush of something waiting to happen. Maisie, Colton's old shepherd dog, padded to the porch from behind the barn. She was getting stiff in the legs these days, but her instincts were sharp as ever. As she reached the bottom step, she stopped cold. Hackles raised. A low, breathy growl escaped her throat, not loud, but steady. Her eyes didn't go to the cows. They were fixed east, toward the low, rolling hills that edged the ranch like a sleeping beast. Colton squinted. "What is it, girl?" Maisie didn't move, didn't blink. Her growl deepened, throat tight with something that wasn't fear exactly, but something close. Ray rubbed his arms. "Man, that dog's giving me the willies." Colton turned back to the field. The cows hadn't budged. The sun rose higher, casting long, rigid shadows behind them like rows of fence posts. "Used to be," Ray said slowly. "My granddaddy told stories about land like this. Said there were spots out here where nothing wanted to grow. Roots had rot before they ever took hold. Called it dead ground." He paused, voice barely above a whisper. "Said there's one out east they called the Throat." Colton glanced over. "The Throat?" Ray nodded. "Said it swallowed things. Not just animals, horses, people, whole moments in time." Colton let the silence sit between them. He didn't believe in stories. Not really. But he'd been around long enough to know that sometimes land held memory, and sometimes memory left marks you couldn't see with the naked eye. That night, Colton sat on the porch with a beer in hand, Maisie at his feet. The wind had picked up just enough to rustle the dry grass, but the air still carried that feeling, like something just out of sight was holding its breath. He watched the stars for a while, then went to bed uneasy. The next morning, the cows were in the same spot, but this time, something changed. Colton stepped onto the porch just after dawn, still wiping sleep from his eyes. The cows stood as before, unmoving, staring east. Then, slowly, as if choreographed, every single one of them turned their heads, not their bodies, just their heads, toward him. He froze. Their eyes were wide, dark, unblinking. And then, all at once, they turned their heads back to the hills. Ray came stumbling out of the house behind him, holding a biscuit and looking pale. "They turned," he said quietly. "All of them. Like they knew we were watching. Like they were warning us." Colton didn't answer. He just stared toward the hills, because suddenly he had the awful bone-deep feeling that something was staring back. Colton didn't sleep that night. Not really. He dozed a little in his chair, rifle leaned nearby, eyes half closed, but his mind kept drifting to that synchronized turn of the herd, like watching statues come alive, like some collective intelligence had passed between them. By morning, the unease had calcified into something heavier, something like obligation. He needed to see what was out there. At sunrise, he saddled up Sadie, his old quarter horse, and gave Maisie a sharp whistle. The dog trotted over, ears flat, already anxious. Ray was leaning on the corral, eyes bleary from lack of sleep. "You going?" he asked. Colton adjusted the cinch and nodded. "Ain't gonna learn anything standing here staring at cow asses." Ray handed him a thermos of coffee reluctantly. "Be careful. My granddad didn't make up that name just for fun." The ride east was slower than Colton expected. The hills, which had always seemed small and gentle from his porch, loomed larger as he approached. They weren't steep, but they were deceptive. The closer he got, the more the grass thinned. Brush died off. The soil went from dry and cracked to damp and dark, like it hadn't seen sun in weeks. Sadie snorted uneasily as they crested the tallest rise. Maisie stopped short at the top and let out a low whine. Colton dismounted and walked the rest of the way on foot. As he reached the ridge, the world beneath him changed. The valley on the other side wasn't like any part of his land he remembered. It was sunken, wide, maybe 2 football fields across. In the middle was a vast patch of bone-white debris scattered like a dry riverbed. Not just a pile, an arrangement. Skeletal remains, curled in spirals and rings. Hundreds of them, too many to count. Colton descended slowly, boots crunching on brittle grass. Maisie lagged behind, tail tucked low. As he neared the bone field, the air grew cold. Not mountain cold, dead cold, like walking into a basement with no door. He crouched near the nearest ring of bones and picked up a cattle skull. The bone was bleached and flawless. No tooth marks, no cracks, no signs of scavengers. It was like the animal had lain down and let go. He spotted horses, deer, even what looked like an elk antler, long and unbroken. It wasn't just livestock. Every kind of grazing animal in Wyoming had left something here. Then he saw it. Near the center of the valley was a depression, a perfect circle. 10 feet wide, ringed with smooth stone as if carved by hand. He approached, flashlight in one hand. The moment he leaned over, a smell hit him. Sharp, metallic, and wrong. It burned the inside of his nose, reminded him of blood and wet copper, but colder. Older, like it had been fermenting for centuries. He clicked the flashlight on and pointed it down. The beam vanished into black, not dimmed, swallowed, like the hole drank light. He tossed a small pebble in. No sound came back. Maisie barked suddenly, frantic from behind. Colton spun, hand on his hip out of instinct, but nothing was there. She was snarling at the sky, ears back, legs trembling. That's when he realized it. No birds, no flies, no sound. Not even the wind moved through the grass anymore. It was silence so thick it pressed on the skin. He backed away slowly. The hole didn't move, didn't shift, but he couldn't shake the sense that something beneath it had noticed him. Watching. The ride home felt longer. Colton didn't speak. Sadie's gait was off. Maisie refused to lead, tail tucked the whole way. As they descended from the hills and the ranch came into view, Colton's breath caught in his throat. The cows were still in formation, hadn't moved an inch, But now there was something else. Their bodies quivered, subtly, like tension under the skin. Their eyes were black-rimmed, too wide. Some had foamy saliva dripping from their mouths. Their breathing was loud, labored. A few kicked at the ground like they were fighting an invisible rope tied around them. But they still stared east, unflinching, unmoving. Colton dismounted, stepping toward the fence line. Maisie stayed back. He watched as Bessie, the led cow, let out a low, guttural moan. The others followed, some higher, some deeper, but the combined sound was unbearable. It wasn't just a noise, it was a signal, a message only they understood. Ray came jogging out of the barn, eyes wide. "They started moaning about 5 minutes ago," he said. "Same time that damn wind shifted." Colton sniffed the air. The smell from the sinkhole, the metal rot, was here, on the wind, in his clothes. He could taste it on the back of his tongue. It didn't make sense. He'd ridden miles since leaving that place. "That smell followed me home," he muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. "And it ain't letting go." Ray opened his mouth to respond, but then stopped, staring over Colton's shoulder. Colton turned. Above the hills, where the valley lay hidden, a ribbon of black smoke curled skyward. But it wasn't rising naturally. It moved against the wind, spiraling like it had a mind of its own. And it wasn't smoke exactly. Not gray or ashy, but black and wet-looking, like oil poured into the sky. Ray whispered, "Is something burning?" "No," Colton said, voice low. "It's coming." And the worst part? The cows had already known. The night bled in slow. Colton didn't light any lanterns. He sat in the dark with his boots on, rifle across his lap, and Maisie curled under his chair. Outside, the wind had picked up, but the house didn't creak like it usually did. It stood still. Too still. The cattle hadn't moved once since he got back. Not to drink, not to eat, not even to lie down. Their shadows, stretched by the moonlight, formed perfect silhouettes across the pasture, all facing east. Around midnight, the moaning started again. Long, drawn-out lowing that seemed to rise from the ground itself. Then, just as suddenly, silence. Colton rose, walked to the window, and saw something he'd never forget. 70 head of cattle, swaying just slightly, as if moved by a rhythm only they could hear. Their hooves shifted in perfect unison. Right, then left. A beat, then again. Like something beneath the earth was pulsing through them, Maisie whimpered. At first light, the sky still tainted by that black smear above the hills. Colton threw on his coat and bolted for the door. Ray hadn't come by. The generator hadn't kicked on. The radio still hissed static. It was as if the ranch had been cut off from the rest of the world. Outside, the cattle were moving. Not scattered, not grazing, marching. They advanced in a slow, coordinated line toward the eastern fence. Their hooves didn't stomp. They glided, noiseless, as if lifted more than stepped. Colton sprinted across the dirt yard, yelling their names like it might matter. "Bessie! Jasper! God damn it, stop!" He reached the fence line just ahead of them and raised his arms. "No further. Y'all don't want what's waiting out there." They didn't hesitate. They didn't even look at him. One by one, they passed through the wooden posts, and through him. Not pushing, not trampling. Passing through his body like cold smoke. The sensation knocked him breathless. His chest tightened. His hands went numb. Bessie was the last to pass. As she moved through him, Colton felt a shudder ripple through his spine, like something old and sad had touched his soul. When he looked back, The pasture was empty. Maisie barked behind him, panicked. She ran toward the ridge, toward the throat. Colton grabbed his saddlebag, slung his rifle, and ran after her on foot. The hills swallowed the sound of his boots. The wind pushed against him like a wall. When he crested the final ridge and looked down into the valley, his blood went cold. The sinkhole had changed. It had widened, its edges now fractured like spiderweb cracks into the ground. Black mist pulsed up from its center, moving unnaturally, not swirling or rising, but folding in on itself. The ring of bones had collapsed inward, forming a spiral path toward the pit, and at the edge of the hole stood his cattle. Not around it, not behind it. At the edge, as if waiting for permission to descend. Maisie stopped, whined, then backed up, refusing to get closer. Colton stepped forward slowly, the earth feeling less solid with each step. Gravity felt wrong. The sky shifted shades without the sun moving. Birds flew backward in the distance. Or maybe time had just warped. Then one of the cows turned. Not physically, not their body, just their essence. Something behind the eyes turned to him, and suddenly he saw. Inside each cow was another shape, a flickering shadow layered beneath the surface, ghosts trapped within flesh, cattle from ages past, generations gone, bones that had fed this thing buried below, now reawakened. Each eye was a window to a soul that wasn't supposed to be here anymore. They weren't mindless. They weren't lost. They had been taken. Colton stumbled backward, gasping, vision doubling. He looked toward the hole and it shifted, as if it noticed him, welcomed him, called to him with no sound, just presence, a feeling that wrapped around the base of his spine and pulled. He dropped to his knees. The wind wasn't wind anymore. It carried breath, whispers, not words, but reminders, emotions, images of animals dying, alone and confused, and the moment their energy was drained into the earth. The sinkhole didn't just kill, it kept. Maisie barked once, sharp and clear. It snapped Colton out of it. He turned, chest heaving, and realized the spiral path wasn't just bone, it was a funnel, a guide, and the herd was beginning to descend. One by one, the cows began walking the spiral, hooves crunching bone, silent as ghosts, their eyes still locked on the hole, drawn, powerless. Colton raised his rifle, not knowing what the hell he'd even aim at. "Stop!" he shouted. "You don't have to do this! You don't!" But they kept walking. They had no choice. Not anymore. He stood frozen, breath shallow, watching the last of them vanish into the pit. Then everything went silent again. Except the hole. The hole breathed, and it was still hungry. Colton didn't remember falling in. One moment he was shouting after his cattle. The next he was somewhere else. Or maybe not somewhere, but somewhen. Time had bent, warped, folded like old leather around him. The light was wrong, not dark, but dull and sour, as if even brightness had grown tired of trying to shine here. The air felt thick, almost tactile, like walking through smoke and honey. And there was noise, not sound exactly, but pressure, a pulsing in his head, rhythmic and slow, like a heartbeat older than any clock. He stood on solid ground, though it shimmered like it might dissolve at any moment. Around him stretched a world that couldn't exist. The sky above bled sideways in colors he couldn't name. The walls were distant and alive, breathing in and out like lungs carved from stone. In front of him stretched a spiraling procession, his cattle, still walking, still silent, still hollow-eyed. But now he could see more. Each cow shimmered faintly, and within them, trapped like flies in amber, were ghostly forms. Not just cattle, horses, deer, elk. He saw the faint outline of a wolf, a bear, even a child's pony with ribbons tied to its mane. Their souls flickered within their bodies, aware but powerless, prisoners. Colton moved toward the front of the spiral. His steps didn't echo. Time moved like syrup. Every now and then he heard something. Not words, meanings. They crawled into his head like spiders. You are the last. He turned toward the voice, but there was no figure. Instead, it came from everything, from the walls, from the dirt, from the air itself. Then something shifted. The far end of the spiral opened into an enormous chamber, an amphitheater carved from stone and time. Its walls were lined with alcoves, and in each was a curled form, animals, all kinds, frozen, watching, trapped in some state between decay and preservation. Every inch of wall held a body, thousands of them, tens of thousands. Their eyes glowed dimly, blinking in slow, synchronized waves. At the center of it all, it waited. It had no name Colton could grasp. He felt the syllables of something ancient press against his ribs like pressure in a storm. It didn't walk. It didn't breathe. It simply existed, massive, shifting, never the same shape twice. One second it looked like a tree with pulsing roots. The next, a cluster of mouths whispering over each other. Then it was a single massive eye, blinking sideways with a hiss. Colton raised his rifle, not knowing what the hell he was aiming for. "Don't," the voice said. Not with words, but with being. The meaning pressed against his chest. Not aggressive, but amused. He fired anyway. The bullet moved like it had weight, but no purpose. It slowed midair, twisted, then dropped to the ground like it had gotten bored of flying. "Futile," it said. Not to scold him, but to educate him, like a parent correcting a child. The entity pulsed. The alcoves glowed brighter. The cattle around Colton stopped walking and turned to face the thing as one. Then the offer came. It didn't speak it. It didn't need to. "Let me feed," it said without saying. "Bring me more. I will spare these. Spare you. You will be shepherd to the feeding. Guide the herds. Let them walk into purpose." The images poured into Colton's head. Ranches across the west. Herds being lured to sinkholes. Farmers who never knew why their cattle disappeared one by one. Generation after generation. It had always been there. This thing, feeding from the edges of belief. Colton fell to his knees. He felt sick. The thing wasn't just a monster. It was a system. A hunger so old it had become part of the land. And now it wanted him as a partner, an accomplice. He almost said yes. He almost gave in to the tired part of himself. The broken part that missed his wife. The hollow part that had started to believe the world didn't care what happened to a lonely old man on a patch of land no one remembered. But then something snapped. It wasn't rage or pride. It was defiance. Small, quiet, but hard as granite. "No," he said, voice cracking. "You don't get to use me." And in that moment, the world trembled. The thing recoiled, not in pain, but in surprise. "No," Colton repeated, louder this time. "You can starve." From the alcoves, something moved. A crack formed in the stone above a bison's skull, then another, and another. The entity twisted, shifting to something sharper, spikier, nervous. It pulsed hard. The pressure grew. But Colton stood tall, watching the walls as thousands of animal spirits began to stir. They blinked, one by one. They remembered. A soft, silver light rose from beneath Colton's boots. A low sound began to build. Not growls, not howls, not calls. but something older. A song made of muscle and earth and pain. They remembered, Colton whispered, eyes wide. And now, they're ready to fight. The amphitheater began to shake, and the thing that called itself Thirster finally screamed. The scream didn't come from a mouth. It came from everywhere. It bled through stone and skin and soul, a shriek not of pain, but of violation, like something ancient and untouchable had finally been touched. The thirster twisted and shrank, then surged outward in a flickering mass of teeth, smoke, and heatless light. Its form flickered, trying to find a shape it could hide in. But there was nowhere to go. The cracks in the alcoves widened. A buffalo, preserved upright for what must have been centuries, snapped its skull forward and bellowed. Its bellow echoed like thunder. All across the amphitheater, thousands of animals once frozen between life and death now surged to motion, their spectral bodies shivering free of stone. The thirster pulsed hard, trying to contain them, pushing waves of dark energy outward. But the spirits surged in. First came the bison, broad, muscular, made of bone and memory. They trampled through the thirster's mass like fire through dry grass. Then came the wild horses, manes blazing like white fire, hooves sparking light from the shifting stone. They ran up the walls, across the ceiling, dragging light with them. Ghost deer bounded over the heads of the herd, slashing through tendrils of darkness. Even birds, ravens, hawks, doves, screamed into the air like bullets of light, pecking at every eye the thing tried to grow. The cattle followed last. Bessie led them. Colton had never seen her move so fast, so sure. Her ghost self still flickered inside her body. But now it was her who charged forward, head down, hooves pounding. She rammed into one of the thirster's forming shapes, a massive eye wrapped in tendrils, and the entire wall behind it shattered. Colton staggered forward, caught in the blast of raw energy. He didn't run. He couldn't. This wasn't just a battle of muscle. It was something spiritual, something ancient. He realized the entity hadn't simply been feeding on life. It had been dimming memory, suppressing everything that made a creature proud. The spirits weren't just winning, they were becoming whole again. But nothing that old dies easy. The thirster let out another shriek and began to collapse inward. Not fleeing, fighting. Its essence drew in, becoming dense, sharp, radiant with sick heat. The amphitheater warped, its stone beginning to shudder and fracture. Colton saw reality folding in, edges curling like paper near flame. He ran. He had to get out. Spirits rushed past him, charging the thing that had trapped them for centuries. He passed a white horse with its ghost rider still on its back, a boy riding like it was summer again. He passed a wolf, jaws open in an eternal snarl, and a dog that looked so much like Maisie it nearly dropped him to his knees. Then, the ground broke. A sound like ripping fabric tore through the air, and Colton felt his feet leave the ground. He was falling, not down, but through layers of sky, of color, of air and light and dark, spinning faster than any fall should feel. Then, he hit. Hard dirt. Cold. He gasped. He was back in the valley. It was morning. Clouds were breaking. Rain pattered soft on his face, and his cattle were standing all around him, calm as if nothing had ever happened. Grazing, breathing, normal. Colton sat up slowly. His limbs ached like he'd been trampled. The sinkhole was gone, collapsed in on itself. The spiral of bones was no more. The entire field looked like it had just seen spring rain, clean, empty, green, the black smoke. Gone. The smell? Gone. Bessie trotted over and nudged his shoulder with her nose. Her eyes were brown again, simple, clear. she remembered nothing. Colton let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped inside him for decades. He stood, gathered his bearings, and whistled low. Maisie came running from behind a knoll, muddy, wet, but whole. She barked once, then licked his hand like nothing had happened. He walked home under gray skies giving way to sunlight. Ray was waiting on the porch with 2 mugs of coffee and eyes full of 1,000 questions. Colton didn't answer any of them. That summer, the ranch flourished. No more odd behavior, no more sleepless nights. Just good cattle, quiet grass, and a rancher who watched the horizon like it might blink. Colton never spoke of what happened in the valley, but he built a stone cairn over the place where the hole had been. No plaque, no name, just a marker. Neighbors started leaving offerings, bits of feed, carved animals, sometimes crosses. None of them knew why. They just felt it was right. Colton aged slow and strong, like hardwood. He never remarried, never left the ranch. But folks said he understood cattle like no one else, that his herd was the calmest, healthiest in the county, that his dog never left his side. On clear nights, he sat on his porch, scanning the hills, not in fear, but with duty. He knew the thirster was gone, but the world was vast and deep, and old things sleep in deep places. He'd know if something stirred again, because if one day his cows started facing the same way again, not moving, not grazing, well, he'd know to follow. If your cows ever start looking towards something too long, maybe don't wait to find out what they're seeing. Colton's story reminds us that some places hold secrets, and some memories refuse to fade. We'd love to hear from you. Have you ever felt a deep, almost mystical connection to a place, or witnessed something unexplained in your own backyard? Share your experiences and insights in the comments below. Your stories are a part of our shared history. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.